Hi there! Today we're looking at a more modern video game controller for this channel, and this is an Xbox One S game controller, and it has a small problem, and that is the headset doesn't really work when it's used through the 3.5mm headset port. The symptoms that I have are you'll put a jack in there and you'll get no sound whatsoever. The microphone won't work. But if you kind of spin the jack around and kind of push it in one direction, sometimes it makes contact with the components on the inside and you get a little bit of distorted or crackly audio. Usually when that happens, it means the headset jack on the inside is damaged and it needs replacement. So today we'll replace the headset jack, which is this tiny little component. I'll bring it into camera for focus. Okay, and this is what it looks like. This is the part that mates with the circuit board on the inside. This is the back part, which is, I think, showing the common ground or microphone connection. I can't remember which one it is. And of course, this is the jack itself, where you plug in your 3.5mm cable. Okay, and we'll get this thing here opened up, and we'll replace this jack on the inside, and it's actually a quite easy process, which I'll demonstrate. So we won't need many tools to complete this task. Well, basically the most important thing to have is some kind of a plastic pry tool to get inside the controller. We'll need to remove this part of the handle and this part of the handle, which exposes some screws. And those are usually really tricky to get with your fingers alone. And it helps to have something like this that you could wedge between the plastic and pop the thing open. It's all held in there by clips, no screws in that part. But speaking of screws, you will need a T9 and a T6 Torx bit to disassemble the case and to loosen up some of the connections that are on the inside. And that's basically it. I have a soldering iron here. I don't plan on using this, but I keep it handy because the last time I did this type of fix with the other controller, I got a little reckless and I damaged some of the wires that are inside and I had to solder them back together again. So depending on how reckless you are, you may or may not need a soldering iron to fix your mistakes once you open this thing up. Okay, let's get started by taking the back case off of this device. So I have my pry tool, and the way I usually start is by inserting it near the bottom end and working my way towards the top. And there are all sorts of clips along this outer edge and this outer edge over here. And there's also a tricky one that goes in the perpendicular direction on this way, which may get in the way if you're not familiar with how this thing opens up. So once you think you have this edge all separated, you get your pry tool and you stick it in here in the middle. You'll find the sweet spot, which is right about there, and then you can pop it off like this. Whoops. And there it is. And that's how we take apart the handles, or the plastic that covers the handles. And we can see on this end that there are all these little clips on the outside, but this one little tricky one is oriented in the opposite direction from every single other one that's there. And so when I first started doing this, and I'm digressing a little bit, I'm sorry, but this is important, that when I first started doing this, I started prying it off in this direction, like this, like away from the bottom. And mechanically, that doesn't make any sense because this thing here is going to continue to grip in that spot of the case, and it will never open. And in fact, if you do force it, you're going to break something, and almost always the controllers are going to win and you're going to lose in that case. So keep in mind the orientation of these clips and you won't damage anything when you take this apart. Okay, let's do the other one. Again, start from the bottom on this edge, work it open. All right, just like that. And find the sweet spot, which is right around here in the middle somewhere, like that. And then gently pry it off, just like that. Okay, so that, believe it or not, is the hardest part of this disassembly. The 4 screws that we want to remove on this handle are here. These are all T9s, 1, 2, and there's 3 and 4. And the 5th one is hidden in the battery compartment, which is right there. And usually there's a label that's covering this part, but because I've opened this thing up so many times and I wanted to preserve the label, I've peeled it off and stuck it on the back of this battery case or this battery cover. So that's the 5th screw right there, also a T9. All right, let's get these things out of the way and let's open up the controller and do our component replacement. Okay, so these 5 screws basically hold the front and the back part of the controller together. And we have these 2 white pieces of plastic that basically enclose the entire controller, all the electronics and components on the inside. Okay, and with those removed, these 2 parts should just separate from each other, just like that. Put this out of the way, and here is the inside of the Xbox One game controller. And the part we need to replace is right here. It sits right there. Before we do that, I am going to give a word of caution and why you might need a soldering iron. And if you pay attention to how this whole thing is assembled, you'll notice that there are a couple of wires on this end and a couple of wires on this end. And effectively what these wires do is they control the motors, the ones that rest in the handle and also the ones that rest in the triggers as well. There's 2 small ones in these triggers that you normally don't think about. But the reason why I bring this up is because these motors are weighted. You can see that there is a pretty significant weight on the bottom of this motor, and another weight on the bottom of this motor, and that is what creates the vibration when these things spin around. And you'll notice that these motors, they don't really secure to the chassis or to this case at all. They're just kind of held in by pressure or friction. So if you turn this thing upside down and you kind of give it a good shake, then these big fat weights are going to fall out and they're going to tug on these wires, and the solder connections that go right to the board are going to snap off. You know how I know that? Because I've done it several times, and that's my recklessness, and that's why I keep a soldering iron handy when I do this type of work. I'll remove the back end as well, as we won't need that for this repair either. Okay, I've zoomed in just a little bit so we can see what we need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, the thing we want to remove is right there. That's the jack. And the nice news is that there are no screws or glue or anything like that that holds this thing in. It is completely pressure fit between this PCB and the one that fits below it. So let's loosen the screws that hold in this PCB. There are a couple of them. I'm going to try and locate them. They're usually in the corners. There's one behind the motor, and there's another one there behind this motor. And I thought there was another one, but we can start with that and we'll see what happens. Effectively, what we want to do is we just want to lift this PCB a little bit and then push this thing out or pull it out, whatever makes the most sense. We'll probably have to remove this Captain tape as well so that it'll slide out the back if necessary. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's get right to it. All right, so I've replaced the bit on my screwdriver to the T6 bit, T6 Torx bit, and I'm going to remove the screws that are near the motor first. I forgot to mention that the external screw, the T9, is actually a T9H or a secure Torx T9. It's the type of screw that has the little dimple or the little protrusion in it that prevents tampering. So you won't be able to use a T9. It has to be a T9H or a secure Torx T9. But the interior screws, they're just regular Torx screws. They don't have that dimple that prevents tampering. Okay. So we got those 2 screws out. There is a component over here that it looks like a header that mates the top circuit board with the bottom circuit board. I think it's for power delivery or something near this area. That's going to hold everything in place, but you can still lever this thing out just a little bit so you can get a bit of clearance. And so I can see that there's a bit of resistance, but that's okay. I can get this thing popped out just like that. There we go. And I've got some separation that now I can work with this, this jack. Okay, and I think I'll try and pull it out with my tweezers. And if that doesn't work, I'll just push it out the other end. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to push it out the other end. This doesn't want to come out at all. You'll get a bit of let's try this again. And there we go. Okay, so this is the one that's presumably damaged. And here's the good one, which I'll place back in. Hopefully I put it in the right way. I think there's only one way this will go in. Yeah, just like that. There we go. And then we'll position it so that it fits into this groove. There's really no way you can screw this up and put it in the wrong orientation. There are all sorts of things that are built into the plastics in the mold that kind of make sure that it can only go in one way. So once you have it in like that, here, I don't think I caught that properly. I'm going to do this once more so you can see how to insert this. First I'll remove it. Let's get this thing out. Okay, that's the good one. Let's reinsert this and get it on camera properly this time. Okay, so it has to orient itself that way so that that little piece of metal is on the bottom part of the jack, and then once you place it in, you just it will just fit right into this slot. And I'm going to have to use my tweezers to reposition it so I can get this on camera. Basically like that. That's where it's going to go. All right. And once you have it there, you just have to seal the top PCB back on again so that it fits with compression. Kind of jiggle it in place. There we go. Oops, this thing is moving around a bit. There we go. And you can see, just like that, it's back to normal. And the next step is basically to put everything back together again, starting with the screws that hold this PCB in place. You go ahead and get your T6 screws that you removed earlier, and we can put them back in place if we can find the hole, which should be right in the corner, right there, right by the motor, and on the other side. Okay. That's one. Double check, make sure everything is oriented properly, and we'll get the other one in place in a moment. Okay, and that looks pretty good. All right, now we put the controller casing back together again. This one's pretty easy, like that. And then finally the back case. The only tricky part is that you need to slip the battery connector through the case before you assemble everything. And that can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you see how it lines up. So bear with me while I do that. I think the trick is to get the top part clipped in first before the rest of the part comes down. That is what I was not paying attention to. And it does look like it latches in place there. So not only do you need to slip in the battery contacts through the plastic, you also need to get the orientation of this top part of the case correct. Through some futzing around, I might actually get this thing together. I think I've done it. Yep, there we go. Everything looks to be in place. And now what we have to do is screw the chassis back together again with the T9H bit. Start with the center. Okay, this is a good time to go down to your Xbox and test everything out. Make sure it works before you really seal everything. And I'm going to go do that right now. Okay, I've gone and tested this and it seems to be working perfectly. No problems. The new part seems to have done the trick. So I've reinstalled the screws and tightened them. And now all I have to do is install these covers back on. Really easy. They just snap in place. You can start from any side and just push it in. No way you can break anything at this point, as long as you don't do anything out of the ordinary. And that's that. So let's get the battery cover back on and we're done. So that's a quick and easy way to replace the headset jack on an Xbox One S controller. As usual, my name is Steve and I hope you found this presentation informative. Thanks for watching and see you next time.